Is it on? It's hello? What are we doing here?
What are we doing here?
We're making a build vlog.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So
Kinda, sorta.
I had a car. It broke. I broke it, and I'm making a better car.
Sick. Game over.
Game
Boom.
over. Yep. Cut to footage.
So what are you doing with this car? Game
So
plan.
this is a build vlog, I guess we'll call it a build vlog,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So we got a build vlog going here of our rally class hill climb car. So I compete with the Colorado Hill Climb Association. I don't know if you can not screw up your focus and look at those. It's loosely based on like an open class rally car, but with extra allowances for horsepower, aerodynamics, lightness. I don't have minimum weights or anything like that I have to do. So it'll roughly follow the build that you would do for a rally car. So the car I had before was my daily when I built it into a race car the first time around. So I had to like do a lot of projects that I could sneak in on weekends or stuff like that, you know, to get the car, you know, fixed and going again to like drive it to work. And so even after it had a roll cage and stuff, I was still daily driving it. So as a result, there were all sorts of compromises and things that with this car, you know, we've taken it down, you know, pretty far that I couldn't do with that last car because it's taken weeks just to get to this point with this car. But since I don't daily my race car anymore, I have a tow rig that I daily. It kind of opened up the opportunity to build it right this time around and not have any of the compromises that the last car had. So some like rough numbers on the last car. It was a 04 WRX swapped to a EJ25 that was all custom homebrew and stuff. It made probably roughly 400 horsepower. It made a little less than that on the dyno on gravel tires, but that's kind of neither here nor there. It's not about the numbers. It was a quick car. It was only like 2660 pounds without drivers in it. So it was pretty light and it was pretty good. It's a accessible car. Like it, let's see, it's taken first overall at a hill climb before against the open wheel cars, a couple championships in the class, a couple course records still that car holds. So it was pretty good, but this car hopefully just be a little bit better in every way. So a little lighter, a little more power, a little bit better suspension geometry, a little better center of gravity, a little bit more driver control, driver ergonomics, cooling, way less blow by. You know, the last car I had to, about every 5 or 10 minutes of driving at speed, I would have to stop and empty the catch cans because it will have filled the catch cans in that amount of time. So hopefully this car I can run it for like a whole day and not have to empty the catch cans and not have to put oil in it every time I start it. But we'll see. The last car also wasn't street legal. The goal for this one will be, so I guess, yeah, I could just like summarize the goals for this one. I'm aiming right now for 2,500 pounds wet with no drivers. On the dyno, over 400 horsepower. You know, not huge amounts of oil consumption. Street legal. Full lights, tail lights, everything like that. Better aero than the last car. Thanks to Flatiron's tuning, we got our hands on a wing back there. So hopefully we'll do some cool shit with that. So kind of the inspiration for this vlog was I got a lot of questions about, well, what's all done to the car, you know, what's under the hood, what have you done to it, how'd you get it so light, stuff like that. So I want to be able to just point to these videos. So that's kind of that, I guess.
Yeah, all done at home.
All done at home in my garage, full of trash and stuff like that. So
trash and trophies.
yeah, all built in the garage on jack stands. No lifts, no TIG welders, nothing like that. Like no fancy shit. You know, grinders and welders and hammers. Race car shit. This car is a 2004 WRX Limited. So because it was limited, the first thing is it had a sunroof. I got this car for 300 bucks, and the guy said that he would buy the sunroof panel back from me once I pulled it for a couple $100. So I got into this car super cheap, which is like all about shopping around and building networking and you know, contacts and stuff like that. So that being said, all the work up to this point has been pretty much free consumables, right? So wire wheels, cut off, you know, welding wire and gas and stuff like that. So we'll run you through some of that stuff, because this is kind of at the end now of the cheap stuff to work on, because at this point now it's time to cage it. It's time to start bolting on expensive parts. Fortunately, a lot of those expensive parts survived from the last car, so we can reuse a lot of that stuff, like the transmission, which had a lot of goodies in there thanks to ZF Design. The motor, for the most part, survived, even though we're going to go back through it and kind of tighten up some tolerances and clean it up a little bit, make it a little sturdier. But like mostly like all the drivetrain stuff, largely the suspension on the last car, it all survived, so that's good. Anyways, for this car, 2004 WRX, we'll take you tip to butt on this thing and show you kind of everything that's done so far. So the first thing you notice, upper core support headlight buckets are cut off. The guy I got the car from wanted to turn it into a bug eye. I'm going to keep it as a blob eye because I think that's the best looking of the Subaru, of all Subaru generations, the 2004, 2005 cars. And I have headlights, taillights, and stuff that are correct for that generation. So I'm going to run that stuff. Moving back from there, the front of the front inner fender hasn't been tubbed yet, but it will get tubbed at some point. Once these strut towers are tied into the cage, they'll be a lot more stable, so I won't be worried about cutting a lot of this support away and the front strut towers moving during all that heat and welding and stuff like that. So once they get tied into the cage, then I'll do the front tubs. The strut towers are stitch welded front and rear. A lot of people go crazy stitch welding rally cars, and I think a lot of it's just not necessary. In terms of actually factory spot welds that I've seen fail on the previous car, it's really just a lot of stuff kind of in the rear end. The package tray between the rear strut towers has like a stamped steel strut bar built into it, and I've seen that like remove itself over time just from the flexing. It actually pops those spot welds. Now that being said, I have some friends at Broken Motorsports and with contacts at Vermont Sports Car. They say the GD chassis picks up a lot from stitch welding the strut towers. So that's what I did. Not a lot to be gained in these chassis, I guess, stitch welding anywhere else. And stitch welding adds weight, and weight is the enemy. So didn't do that stuff. The GD chassis are naturally a lot stiffer than the GCs. It was a big initiative from Subaru back when they were rallying these things to have a nice stiff chassis to start with. So the GDs are pretty good, and that's really cool. But like, you know, for an automotive manufacturer, like that shows their commitment to like the whole rally thing with like making sure the chassis was good, you know, from the start. So that's super cool. Anyways, strut towers stitch welded, and then 1/8 inch thick plates of steel welded on top of the stitch welded strut tops. These are here because what happens with the repeated impacts in kind of a rally or gravel style thing, landing jumps, hitting bumps, stuff like that, they'll actually kind of mushroom upwards. So with this piece of steel in place there, it helps keep it all nice and flat and stronger. And that is a known failure point on these chassis after they take repeated hits. So the front and rear strut towers both have an 1/8 inch thick plate of steel that's laser cut and then installed there. It also is a good place to tie the cage into. So once the cage goes in, it'll be a custom cages kit out of the UK, a homologated design. So it'll tie into from the like windshield down bar at the foot and also up by the dash bar. It'll come forward in a triangle because triangles are strong, right? And it'll tie into the front strut tower. Similarly, the rear will have an up from the main hoop cage foot down, and then it gets all sorts of triangulation from the other side as well. Additionally, I'll show you guys, I'll weld in a it'll act like a strut bar and also add some more vertical stability as well. It'll just be a diagonal down from each strut tower down to the floor in between the strut towers. So because I cut out that package tray, there's no more, you know, strut tower reinforcement kind of, or you know, what a strut bar would do on your off the shelf stuff. So I'll weld in a bar that does that, and that will tie into these reinforcement plates inside the car. So here's the thing on the last car that always drove me nuts, because I'm like insane about trying to take weight out of these cars. Weight is so important. I'm a broken record about getting weight out of these cars. So when you put in cage feet, they weld to the floor, and there are brackets in the floor in the cage foot area that end up getting welded in at that point that you can't remove without cutting the cage out. And that always drove me nuts in the last car. So with this car, we went whole ham on all the little brackets and stuff, you know, in the car that don't need to be there, because we're not doing things like attaching rear, you know, car seat belts and stuff like that, like for your, you know, kid's car seat or something like that. So we don't need that reinforcement back there. You know, we don't run the factory handbrake, so we don't need all of its bracketry. We don't run the factory seat rails, so we cut those out. There's a big panel up on the firewall of these cars that's really just there for like some, you know, noise and cabin heat reduction. But these cars get super hot on the inside in a motorsports application anyway, so cut that shit out. So save a bunch of that weight. It goes all the way back to, like I was saying, the package tray in the rear strut tower area. And you can see kind of all these places where the floor is gray. There probably was either a bracket there or like that tar sound deadening. So we used dry ice to get the tar out, and that stuff works pretty good because then it just kind of freezes it. You tap it with a hammer and it shatters out. And then lots of time with wire wheels. We've got like 3 wire wheels worth of just wire wheeling shit off the inside of this car. So a lot of brackets down there. If you look, you notice the B-pillars don't look like a factory B-pillar. Because we put a roll cage in the car, we don't need all the factory NHTSA rollover protection. So there's a lot of stuff in these cars that make them really safe as road cars, but they make them really heavy, and especially top heavy for a race car. So you gotta drill out a billion spot welds, you gotta cut some stuff, grind some stuff, and you can get that, there's like 3 layers on the inside of the B post that come out, and altogether each side is about 25 pounds. So between both B posts, it's like 50 pounds of weight. And a lot of that weight is actually in the top section. There's a couple thick steel rods on this generation. So I've heard that the Bug Eyes don't have those rods in there, and so it may not be 25 pounds for some of the earlier chassis. But in this case, I haven't weighed them yet. The plan is, I don't know if you guys have video of my bin of scrap steel over there, but the plan is to weigh all the brackets and shit that I cut out of the car, to see how much weight it actually removed. And when I do that, I'll weigh each B post and see how much weight each B post actually took out. So there's that. A lot of other stuff that we just don't utilize anymore, like the factory dash bits for all your HVAC controls, factory steering wheel attachment with like the tilt column. Don't need any of that stuff, so I cut all that stuff off. There's brackets to attach all that stuff. There's a big heavy brackets to attach the like factory master cylinder, like pedal assembly, all that stuff. That's all pretty strong because that's an important part to have in the car. But we'll be running a pedal box, so all that stuff will be self-contained and on the floor. So cut all that shit out too. So cool. The eagle-eyed viewer will notice that the trunk floor is flat right now. That panel hasn't been fitted yet, but we cut out the factory spare tire well. I cut out the little boxes kind of on the rear rockers. That's all mainly in the name of simplicity, but there's a weight saving factor for it too. And also aerodynamically, there's advantages. Even just not having stuff hanging down back there already, it's an advantage, and cutting the bumper as well. But then it opens up all sorts of opportunities to throw like big ass cool 3D diffusers and stuff like that under the car, or make use of the tire exit, like the tire wake, to try and wrangle that and make some downforce off that as well. A degree from the University of YouTube in aerodynamics, so take all that with a grain of salt. And if you're a fluid dynamicist out there right now, like, what the hell, this guy's a dummy. Yeah, I know. In my defense, I've heard that multiple global rallycross programs did the same thing. When I inquired as to like, hey, how'd you guys develop your aero? They're like, I don't know, we just bought stuff that made sense and put it on the car. So anyways, yep. The fuel tank is a big problem on these cars when doing motorsports stuff. Especially when you turn right, the fuel pickup is in the right saddle of the saddle tank. So if you turn right, all that fuel sloshes to the left, and they can fuel starve really easily. The last car, I had done as much like gimmickry as I could to try and keep fuel at the pickup, utilizing all sorts of stuff from like really high fuel pump duty cycles, hydromat products, like zip tying hoses in specific places to make sure that as much fuel is moving. There's a siphon pump to move the fuel from the left saddle to the right saddle, and even like that needs fuel return, so running 100% duty cycle all the time on anything other than idle to try and be siphoning as much fuel out of that left side saddle back. Still, it was all compromises, and it's a big problem with these cars. So the plan is to go to a fuel cell. There is a little pocket, because a lot of folks mount a fuel cell in the trunk area when they build these things into rally cars, and they do, they switch to a fuel cell because we can run a stock tank, both in rally and in hill climbs. But when a lot of folks go to a fuel cell, they'll mount it in the trunk because it's a nice place where you can mount a big ass box with tons of capacity. Now we don't need big capacities. Our longest course is like 5 miles. The car gets about a mile to the gallon under competition use, so we need at least 5 gallons, but that's way less than like the 20 gallons you would need properly for a stage rally. So there's a little pocket in the rear seat area. I don't know if you guys want to cut footage of this somewhere in here too. You can kind of nestle it into the rear suspension where one of the saddles from the factory tank would have gone. But the plan anyways, is to build a little box to sink it down as low as possible. Because just like keeping everything lightweight, the location of that weight is really important. So the closer I can keep everything not only to the ground for a low center of gravity, but also to the middle of the car for like that lower polar moment of inertia, the better it is for the handling of the car. So, the seats will be moved as far back as possible and also as close together as possible. I want to keep the heavy things like fuel kind of as close to our butts as possible as well. So the plan right now is to put that in the back seat and keep it nice and low, and also be able to run a fuel cell, which has all sorts of fuel pickup advantages. And being small, there's less room for that fuel to slosh away from the pickups. On the other side, to balance things out, we're allowed to run just a pair of handheld fire extinguishers, but the plan is with this car to up our safety game a little bit as well. So the plan is to run an onboard fire system in the car, and also move the intercooler and radiator sprayer tanks from the front of the car to the rear seat area as well, to try and move that weight to a more advantageous location. I know this is a lot of really dry stuff right now, and I know it's a lot of just standing here, or me standing here talking at you, or even talking off to the side about all these really dry topics. You gotta stick with it. This is all really important stuff to making a race car, but it's really dry and not especially sexy stuff to do. It's a lot of grinding, it's a lot of really dirty time, it's a lot of going inside and blowing like dust, metal shaving boogers and stuff like that. So we just gotta make it through this part. It'll get better, it'll get cooler. There's like way better parts, like putting together motors where like everything's like sweet and clean and tight tolerance and stuff like that, and you're not using a grinder. But got to make it through this part. This is the framework like that makes a car good, right? So this is I mean, literally it's the chassis of the car. But when people talk about, you know, what it takes to make a successful race car, it's starting with a successful skeleton of a car, right? It's starting with a successful chassis. So this is the part where it sucks, where I'm not motivated to get out here. I'm not motivated to even really talk about it. Like, I like talking about this stuff in theory, but when I talk about how many like cold ass, because I live at 9,000 feet up here in Colorado too, right? So it's, you know, it was below zero for like a couple weeks ago, and it's regularly pretty cold in here. And so it's like a lot of cold, long days in here just grinding at stuff. But this is where like the time matters. This is where it makes or breaks the next 5 seasons, just right here. So it's important, although I get it and I agree with you guys, this part's boring. But you know, we'll get through it. We'll get through it, and then it'll be time to do sexy stuff like shoot fireballs and do jumps and stuff. So
Oh yeah.
hell yeah. Cool. Okay, so the last car was a 5x100, like 04 STI stuff. Actually, it was 03 JDM STI stuff. This car I want to switch to the 5x114 hub pattern, mainly for the stronger wheel bearings. So, and also more easily serviceable. So the front wheel bearings on the 05 and up STIs bolt in, they're unit bearing. So you don't have to press in and press out a bearing, which makes them easier to replace. They're also literally just bigger. So it's strong. The wheel bearings take a beating in any kind of competition car, whether it's, you know, track use or rally or what. So, so part of that then is switching out hubs. All of the last hubs took a pretty big impact too, like enough to shear some strut ears and bend the whole chassis up and stuff like that. So I'm trying not to use anything from the last car that's like hard to inspect or would have taken a big impact. So cast iron, you know, you can, you know, flex it, magnaflex it, and kind of check for cracks and stuff like that. But in this case, since I'm switching, there are a handful of reasons that kind of all stack up to switch. So it's a good opportunity, since the suspension has to be repaired. It can switch to the larger hub bolt spacing for the later STI stuff. Also, I bent a bunch of wheels, and I was starting to, you know, amass a pretty good stock of bent wheels even before the accident. So I had like a total of 13 wheels. So if I was gonna just switch them for no reason, then that's a pretty big expense. But since probably about 8 of them were damaged at this point, that's most of the way there to just replacing, you know, and going to a different hub center anyway. So today we worked on some hubs a little bit and some control arms. We also cleaned up the front subframe that came with this chassis because it was fresh. The front subframe from the crashed car had shifted and bent, so we replaced that. So cleaned it up a little bit. The steering rack from the crash car is it's quicker than a quick rack or like a 15 STI rack. It's a 12.5-to-1 ratio. So it makes the car hugely better to drive, and it survived the crash, which was I was pretty stoked to see that. I was bummed about having to replace the steering rack if I had to do that. So got the rack cleaned up, put it back on this, you know, subframe that we freshened up. Both lower control arms from the last car were bent, like fully tacoed. So got some fresh aluminum lower control arms from a later STI, threw those in. Still got to do some bushing stuff, but at least they're in right now to get the car rolling, because soon it needs to go off and get a cage. Along with all that stuff, we're putting in the white line roll center correction kit. I'm not going to explain everything about what that does right now, but it's important. I want to get this car as low as possible. When you lower Subaru, your suspension alignment or your suspension geometry actually gets worse. So this is an attempt to correct that a little bit to create much better like dynamic camber curves and stuff like that. So it also, since we got to replace the tie rod ends and ball joints anyways, it's the time to do that. So we got new unit bearings to go in the front hubs. I don't run any of the parking brake stuff, so got to just hammer all that stuff off the old hubs. All the dust shields will go. I don't run dust shields, even though it's extremely dusty application. For the most part, the dust shields kind of just hold rocks and stuff up against the rotors, and I want them open to let that stuff kind of like clear out. What else do we do? Viet helped me out. He pulled the rear, yeah, that guy. He pulled all the rear lateral links off of the old car, or off the old subframe. The old subframe we're not going to reuse, but the lateral links are pretty strong aluminum Heim jointed units, so we'll reuse those bits, and I got a new subframe to put on the car. So we run STI subframes. I know some people are kind of, they go back and forth about, are the subframes different? This is actually an application where the STI subframe is better. It has a solid steel insert where the subframe attaches to the chassis of the car, where the other cars have a rubber bushing in there. So we want everything as tight as possible, so we run the STI subframes because of that solid steel bushing. And that's all I gotta say about that.
Nice. What else we gotta talk about? Timeframe.
Timeframe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And then
We rolling?
yeah, we're rolling. We're always rolling. Also, kind of just say from the follow the build or whatever.
Yeah. So we have kind of a tight time frame for this car too. I don't know if it's realistic, but you gotta aim for the stars so you crash into the moon. So it is January, early January. What is it, like the 8th right now? Yeah, it is some shit like that. And the first race scheduled for our season is at the end of April. It's on kind of standby right now. They may not actually run it at that date. But either way, like by May, hoping to have this car rolling. Now I think that's actually a pretty ambitious time frame. I don't know if we're gonna make that, but we're gonna try. There's a lot of stuff that kind of just needs to fall into place right now. And a lot of that kind of has to do with stuff that I can't, manage myself, or waiting on stuff to show up. So like right now we're waiting, the cage kit is a kit that shows up on a pallet from England. So we're waiting for that actually to show up. And then there will be some steps along with that in terms of, there's a weld test for that kit to make sure that your welds are good. So that has to go back to England, where they literally pull it apart and test it, and then they certify your weld. Then you finish the cage, and then you take a bunch of pictures of it, and then they ensure that you installed it correctly, and then they send you your homologation sticker. So there's a lot of stuff like that that just logistically takes some time, but hopefully at some point this season, I would say realistically we'll be racing this car. But we'll see.